Amen. Well, this morning is awesome, not just because we're doing baptisms, but because we are closing the Paper Tiger series. We've spent the last couple months talking about some of the major things that cause stress in our lives and hold us back from living the lives God made us for. We've been learning to see them through God's eyes, learning that they're nothing more than paper tigers. They're no real threat to us. They're nothing to fear, not because we're strong, but because He is. And hopefully for all of us, in some of these areas, we found liberation from the fear that held us back. And we've been released to the lives and the futures we were created for. And today we're going to finish things up by taking a look at a measurably significant source of anxiety, not just in our country, but across the world. It's something that can feel crippling. That can leave every one of us afraid to venture out and live the lives we're desperately longing for and chase the dreams that God has placed deep inside our souls. And it's this: weakness. We worry a lot about our weaknesses. I read an article in Psychology Today this week which suggested that rarely does human creativity shine more vividly than in our ability to continually come up with credible ways in which we are inadequate. I don't know if that rings true for you, but it certainly does for me. It was this wake-up call and a reminder that this fear, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not capable enough, that I'm not sufficient enough, that I'm not competent enough, that fear is a constant companion for me. And I know I'm not alone. There was a Gallup poll conducted a few years ago across multiple cultures on multiple continents, and it varied in socioeconomic groups, age, income, and everything else, and it found that the majority of the people on this planet are more consumed with thinking about their weaknesses than their strengths. The researcher concluded for many of us, our fear of our weaknesses seems to overshadow any confidence in our strengths. Most of us assume our weakness trumps our strength. So inadequacy, our fear about our weakness is real. And it's powerful, and it's pervasive, and what do we do with that? Because it's hard to overcome. It's hard to overcome, especially while we're living in the middle of a culture where independence, self-reliance, and strength are counted among the greatest virtues one could possibly have. We live in a world and in a culture where we either want to be strong or fake it enough that everybody around us thinks we're strong. A few years ago, while I was working as a youth pastor in Minnesota, my wife took our kids to visit her family, and so I was home alone, which is always a recipe for great things to happen. And our microwave had just fizzled out, and I got this brilliant thought, like, hey, I could show Jenny what a strong, amazing, capable guy I am if I just replaced the microwave. So I went out and bought one, and I got it home and realized that there was a picture on the box and also on the inside of my old microwave that said team lift only, and it had like the little picture of two people lifting it, and then right next to that it had a picture of one person being crushed by the microwave and a line through that. But strength, self-sufficiency, right? So I was like, no worries at all. I'll just do this. And I lifted the old one off the wall, and things were going great until the power cord got stuck in the cupboard above it that it was threaded through, and I couldn't get it out. And I couldn't also put the microwave back on the wall because I had broken the tabs that kept it on the wall. And also, I don't know if you can tell, but look at me. I am not a power lifter. So I had about 11 seconds of strength left before I dropped it, and I had a broken microwave and a broken stove. And I came up with this last-ditch plan that I would try and hold it with all the strength I had in one arm and yank the cord with my other arm, see if I could get it free. And it worked, and so I took the microwave and I carried it across, and I set it down and turned around, and that was when I noticed the trail of blood. I knew this, but I hadn't fully realized that as I yanked the cord, I managed to hit my finger against one of the broken tabs on the pressed steel plate that holds microwaves on walls. And I ran over to the sink, I washed it off, put some paper towels and some pressure on it, and after a while I thought, I should probably see how bad it is. And so I peeked underneath the paper towels, and I saw my finger bone. It was there. I got a picture of it. Check. No, I'm just kidding. That was so gross. I'm not making. So anyways, I called Jenny. I felt like I was gonna pass out, probably from seeing the bone, and I don't know. But I called Jenny, and I was like, hey, just cut my finger and I saw my bone, and anyways, I'm bleeding all over the place, and I'm going to go to ER right now, and if I don't call you back in 20 minutes, then send someone to look at me, or send someone to look for me because I might be passed out. I got to go. And I hung up right as I could hear her screaming, "What?" into the phone. And I made it, and I got all fixed up, and I got a tetanus shot, and then I got home, and I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I'm going to put up this new microwave is what I'm going to do. And you know why I decided that I could do that? Because I had not learned my lesson yet. That like faking or pretending like I was self-sufficient wasn't the best idea in the history of the world. And I have this gnarly scar, which, by the way, totally ruined my potentially lucrative career as a hand model, so I have to be a pastor now. But, like, I got this scar as a constant reminder for me of just how dumb it is to pretend that we're strong when really we're not. And I wonder how many of us carry similar reminders with us everywhere we go. Maybe not physical scars. If you're smarter than me, that's not a very high bar, but like relational ones and emotional ones. Scars that instill fear in us because of our past failures and hold us back. I think the reality of life is it's difficult to avoid getting into those situations that leave those kind of scars and cause that kind of hurt, because we have been sold on the idea that self-reliance is strength, and one of the most great and important traits that you can have is self-sufficiency. We're a society that worships strength, and anyone who can display it gets put up on a pedestal. And then in our own lives, we see other people's strengths, and we know our weaknesses, and we try and minimize them. We try and cover them up so that no one will notice, even though we are very aware of them. I mean, we do it all the time, try and paper over our weaknesses. Anytime you're in a job interview or a college application, anything like that, right? And they ask, what's your greatest weakness? How many of you actually put down weaknesses? Nobody does. No one's like, what's your greatest weakness? I am a huge procrastinator. I don't work well with others. Pick my nose a lot. Like, no, we don't do that. We wouldn't get chosen. So we write down humble brag, fake weaknesses. Like, I care too much. I'm too hard of a worker. That's my greatest weakness. In the back of our head, while we're writing that stuff down, all that's running through there is the actual weaknesses and inadequacies and insufficiencies that we know we have. And I want us to understand something this morning. The idea that it's not okay to be weak is dangerous. I think we get this cultural message all the time that weakness is unacceptable, and it's a dangerous message because we all know that we are weak. Something inside every one of us knows that we can't handle this life all on our own, that we are not able to do some things. There are some weights in this world that are too heavy for us to carry. And what do we do then? What do we do when we encounter situations where we're not strong enough, especially when the stakes are high? When we lose a loved one, when a relationship falls apart, when we get rejected or overlooked or forgotten, when our family struggles relationally or financially, when the future looks dim and we're not really sure what it holds, when we witness the type of evil that would cause someone to shoot their classmates at a school, what do we do when we look around at an evil, broken world and realize we do not have the ability and we do not have the answers? That we're weak in places where we wish we were strong. Where do we find hope when we feel hopeless? I want to encourage you this morning by telling you that in those moments and in those spaces, we can find hope in the cross of Jesus Christ. In our weak moments, we can find strength in the cross, not because the cross is a symbol of strength, but because the cross is a symbol of weakness. I know that seems counterintuitive, but let me explain. We tend to see in our culture the cross as like something almost triumphant. It's all over the place. It's on tattoos and churches and pictures and signs and T-shirts. It's the most recognizable symbol in the entire world. And because of that, we don't tend to think twice when we see it displayed all over the place. But if we could rewind 2,000 years, we would not find people who were thinking that same thing when they saw a cross. The cross was not a symbol of victory in the Roman Empire. The cross was a symbol of death and execution. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't anything that represented hope. And the idea for people living in the time of Jesus, that if Jesus was really God, if Jesus was really the conquering king, come to defeat death and save us, that he would be killed on a cross? That was unthinkable to them. The disciples couldn't even wrap their minds around the fact that Jesus was serious when he kept talking about how he had to die. They just didn't believe him. But this morning, I believe the cross can be a game changer for us when it comes to anxiety about our weakness. If you have your Bibles with you, you can open them up to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, or you can open them up in the Revision app. If you don't own a Bible, please take one from the Next Steps table on your way out. We'd love to give you one. But the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 is talking about the cross, talking about what it means that Jesus came and he died for you and me. He became weak so we could be strong. And this is what he writes in verse 18. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. See, for people living in the first century, the cross was the ultimate sign of weakness. And for many then and even now, the gospel, this idea that the God of the universe would come and he'd give up his life, he'd allow himself to be killed and buried for us because he loved us, it's foolishness. It doesn't make any sense to them. I mean, why would God use a symbol of torture and death and weakness to bring life and hope to the world? And the cross is so familiar to us that sometimes we forget it. Sometimes we forget the weight of it. But like if we saw someone walking around with a tattoo of a lethal injection needle or a t-shirt that had like a bloody guillotine on it, we'd think, oh, that's messed up. That guy, that's a weirdo. I'm not going to talk to that guy. That's disturbing. That's the cross. I think that's God's point. It's what makes the cross so beautiful. God takes what from a human perspective is foolish. He takes this thing that has no glory and carries no honor. He finds the least likely symbol in the world for love and life and says, yeah, I'll use that. Watch me. That's what Paul says he's doing. He continues in verses 22 through 25 of 1 Corinthians 1. He says, Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Like who else but God could take this symbol and change it completely? Who else but God could take a cross that represented defeat and turn it into a symbol of victory? Who else but God could take a cross that represented guilt and turn it into a symbol of grace? Who else but God could take a cross that represented freedom and turn it into a symbol, or a cross that represented condemnation and turn it into a symbol of freedom? Who else but God could take a cross that represented pain and turn it into a symbol of healing? Who else but God could take a cross that represented suffering and turn it into a symbol of hope? Who else but God could take a cross that represented death and turn it into a symbol, the greatest symbol of life the world has ever known? Nobody could, but he can. He can. Jesus' death, like when you look at it from an outside perspective, it seems like God's weakest moment, but in reality, it's God's strongest moment, and there's something in there that I want us to see. This is a big idea that I want all of us to walk out of here believing at the core of who we are this morning. What God did for the cross, he can do for you. What God did for the cross, he can do for you, because God takes weak things and he makes them strong, not by their own power, but by his. Like when you're at your weakest, when you feel frustrated and depressed and lost and overwhelmed and uncertain, when you look inside yourself and do not see the strength to overcome the circumstances you are presently facing, you are exactly where you need to be for God's power to come through. You're just right in the spot that he wants you, so that he can prove to you that he is strong where you're not. If we keep reading in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 27 says this: God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Here's the thing I want us to see in that. God didn't just choose the cross in spite of its weakness. God chose the cross because of its weakness. That's what Paul says he's doing here in 1 Corinthians 1. And if you open up your Bible and you read through it, you find that God does this continually. Over and over and over again, God chooses the weak. Abraham was old, Jacob was insecure, Leah was unattractive, Joseph was humiliated, Moses was a stutterer, Gideon was a wuss, Rahab was an oppressed prostitute, David was a shrimpy little ginger, Elijah was suicidal, Jeremiah was depressed, Jonah was disobedient, Naomi was a widow, John the Baptist was a bug-eating weirdo, Peter was an idiot, Martha was a worrier, Thomas had doubts, Paul was in bad health, and Timothy was timid, among others. among others. The Bible has this long list of imperfect misfits who discovered that weakness is strength when we rely on God, that he can do for them what he did for the cross. It seems backwards to us, but God teaches us that when we think we're strong, we're really weak. But when we acknowledge our weakness and we humble ourselves before him, we put ourselves in a position to receive his strength, which is greater than any strength we could ever muster up on our own. And Paul leans into this idea again in his next letter to the Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10, he writes this. But he said to me, God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I mean, there's so many times in our lives, at least in mine, and if you're anything like me, I'm guessing it's true for you, where our weaknesses and our sense of our own insufficiency just feel overwhelming. And we find ourselves just grasping at ways where we can be strong. And it's true even when it comes to our salvation. We know that we're broken and we know that we're messed up and we know that we're imperfect. We desperately want to earn it. We want to figure out a way to achieve our way back to God, but we can't. We can't do it. We can't be good enough. We can't earn it. And the message of the cross, the foolishness of the gospel is that that's okay. That we don't have to because he did it for us. The cross is the place where God was strong so that we could be weak because we are weak. And the cross is so amazing because it's this place where God invites us to come before him and admit that we're weak so that we can rely on him to be strong. And that's why Paul said, I'm not worried about my weakness. I'm not anxious about my inadequacy. I boast in my weakness. Because in my weakness, he is strong, and his strength is the strength that I need. So I think God invites us to admit our weaknesses and allow him to be strong. To stop being consumed by anxiety about our own insufficiency because we know he's sufficient for us. God invites us to realize that our own weakness, that our own incapability is a paper tiger. It's nothing to fear and it's nothing to worry about because of his strength. And the question is, will we do it? Will we make that shift in our minds from being consumed with fear and worry that holds us back because we know that we're weak to being excited because we know that he's strong? Will you do it this morning? It's not easy. It's countercultural, and it requires swallowing your pride. But it also means being set free from the stress and the pressure to pretend you're self-sufficient while knowing deep down that you are not. Our 3-year-old twins love shooting Nerf guns. They call the little bullets their shoots, and most of all, they love to shoot me, but they have a problem. They're not strong enough to cock the guns on their own, and so they have to continually come to me really frustrated because they want to be independent and they want to do it on their own, come to me and ask me to do it for them so that they can shoot me, which is not always the easiest thing to convince me of. But I had this profound moment last week. My son Billy came up to me and he handed me a gun and he said, "Daddy, can you do this for me? I am not strong to do it, but you are strong to do it." I have a lesson to learn from my 3-year-old kid. If I learned it a long time ago, I wouldn't have a scar on my finger. I have a lesson to learn about admitting the places where I am weak so that someone else can be strong. Our world is a broken, shattered, messed up place. There's so much hurt and so much pain and hatred and division and brokenness and evil and death and destruction, and we are messed up people, sinners from the start with no ability to save ourselves. Just destined for death and separation from a God we rejected. But God is inviting every single one of us today to admit that we are weak and allow him to be strong. What God did for the cross, he can do for you. He took this beat up, bloody symbol of weakness and death and turned it into the most triumphant symbol for victory and life that the world has ever known. And if today We can walk out of here and admit like a 3-year-old, I am not strong to do it, but you are strong. Then we'll find his strength in place of our weakness. And our weakness can make a shift. It can move from being this thing that causes us to fear, that causes us anxiety, that imprisons us and holds us back from chasing after the dreams that God placed inside of our souls. It can move from that to being this thing we boast in because we know that where we are weak, he is strong and his strength is greater than any strength we could ever muster. His strength is the strength that we need. We can know that even though we aren't sufficient on our own, we have a God who walks with us and fights for us, and he is strong. So our weakness is nothing to fear, and we can live with this incredible, unshakable confidence. We can know that because of what Jesus did for us on the cross, because of his death and resurrection, our future is secure. No matter what happens, no matter how dark the days seem, no matter what storms we face, no matter how helpless we feel while we're facing them, we can have great hope because he is mighty and mighty to save. He's in control, and he will never, ever leave us, and that is worth hoping for. In a world where we're weak and we can't do it on our own. Will you guys pray with me? Lord, thank you for being strong where we're weak. Thank you for this love that compelled you to come and give your life for us, to take on weakness, to be buried and die, and then rise again so that we could live. God, all of us have anxiety about the places and the spaces where we're inadequate. And I pray this morning that we'd have the courage to release that to you, to just open our hands and trust that if we can admit that we're weak, that if we can come to you and trust you, you will be strong. And your strength, not ours, is the strength that we need. We love you and we worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.